A lot of attention has been paid while the protests have developed over the course of the past few months that, hey, look, they are far more diverse than these sorts of protests might have been in years past. That look, white individuals are showing up and standing alongside, protesting against police brutality and all of that. But how much does it actually mean to go to a protest? How significant is that? Naira, you wrote an article, "If You're Not Black in America, Protesting is the Easy Part." Tell us a little bit about what you're getting at.
Yeah, so I wrote that for the Washington Post after a long reflection on really how my life has operated. I have a Black husband, I have a Black son, so a lot of this affects us in a very personal and deep way. But I'm very aware of the fact that I'm not Black, and so there are things that are easier for me to do, and things that are easier for you, John, to do in society that it doesn't bring the risk of police brutality, of being separated from your family, or even day-to-day job discrimination, housing discrimination that Blackness does. And so I think that that's part of the recognition of is while it's great to have this huge coalition that is still turning out in the streets and putting the pressure on, that we, the rest of us who are not Black, have to practice anti-racism on a day-to-day level, right? There are the people who are the activists and the policymakers who are coming together and using all of this grassroots pressure to push for legislation at the federal level, to push for legislation at the state level. But at the end of the day, if we're not changing the culture in our communities and the culture of where our police officers are raised, we're not going to end up solving this problem. And that's frankly, that's on the rest of us.
Yeah, and I found it interesting. You talk about the difference between sort of going to a protest, being anti-racist in public, where it can be seen, where hypothetically you could post about it on social media, versus doing it persistently, consistently in private. Tell me a little bit about that.
I think the second part in private, right, where it's your friends and your family and everybody looks like you, that it's riskier. I mean, I think it takes a level of social courage to challenge somebody, whether it be your uncle or grandpa or even a friend, for making a racist comment, saying like, dude, that was kind of racist. Like, what's up with that? It's much harder to do that because you risk losing social capital. Whereas, particularly if you're in progressive circles, right, going out and protesting as a group, there's an affirmation that comes with it, right? Like it feels good to be speaking up and doing something and being out in the streets. And so there's a social affirmation that comes with being able to do that. Now, of course, there are risks. We've seen how police react. We've seen how the White House has reacted. But even then, you're with a cohort of people who will back you up. It's when you're alone. Right, when you're alone and you're not the dominant voice, that I think it takes a lot more courage to speak up. But I also think it's where it's necessary to speak up because we hide so much behind this idea of civility, right? I'm just gonna let it go. I'm gonna play nice. Let's just move on from that. And that civility actually ends up being a cover for the person who is deeply racist to keep mouthing off, and we cede the floor to them. So like I end up being polite, and they end up dominating the space. And you look at them like that's actually not the outcome we're looking for when we talk about what civility should be.
Yeah, that's interesting because I think when I think about like it being in LA, when you go to a protest, you go to one of these protests, who are you in opposition to? Hypothetically, the cops, but also conservatives who are, yeah, exactly, or conservatives who are sort of explicitly want to maintain this system. That's not. Like, as you point out, yes, there are potential costs, but it's not super difficult for a sort of LA white liberal to do that. Doing it in private, who are you in opposition to? Probably not a super conservative. It's probably another liberal who, despite not being a conservative, still benefits from white privilege if they're white, probably holds some, problematic views. And it's sometimes more difficult to provide that sort of criticism to people that are closer to us politically than those who are much farther, where, yeah, there's a bigger gap, but that gap sort of insulates you from any sort of pain or cost to it.
Right, and that gap also comes in, right? We're still trying to chip away this idea that I'm not racist, all right? I'm not part of the KKK. I believe Black people should be able to vote, and I would never like beat somebody up for being Black. And like that seems to be the threshold of not being racist. Like I'm like, no, guys, that was 60 years ago. right? Right now we're trying to make sure that there's equity and that people have equal chances, and we have to look at the systems that we've created and that we actively participate in. I mean, for example, the South Asian community deeply benefited from the civil rights movement because at the same time is when Congress then pushed through immigration reform that allowed for all of these folks to be able to come in from overseas, particularly the doctors and nurses and engineers that we have from South Asia. Direct result of the civil rights movement, yet it is not a community that has recognized or allied itself with Black people for generations. And so that's part of the unraveling of what are the kinds of prejudices we're bringing to the table when we have these conversations, and thinking that we're allying ourselves with what is white supremacy rather than allying ourselves with the people who are in the same position as us, who are advocating for the same things that we want, which is equity in society.
Yeah, well, look, I want to thank you for both writing it, but also joining us. Very interesting conversation. Definitely raises a lot of thoughts, worthy of a bit of introspection. And so, Nair Haq, thank you for joining us today.
Thank you, John.
For more political news breakdowns, interviews, stories of activism, and me trying my hardest to care about the occasional big celebrity news story, subscribe to our YouTube channel at youtube.com/thedamagereport. And you can ring the bell wherever it is so you don't miss anything.